All right. Thanks for joining us again here on the Gill Athletics Connections Podcast. I am your host, Mike Cunningham, and today's guest, this is actually kind of personal for me for today's guest. You've already seen his name on the title. Help me welcome the wise, the wonderful, Mr. Boo Schexnayder. Boo, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. Of all the introductions I've had, that was the most touching and most amusing at the same time.
Well, I think that's what my wife says about me as well. Like, you're very touching, but you're very amusing, Mike. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Boo, it's a real honor to have you here, not only for, I'm just so excited to bring your story to the listeners and the many journeys you've had in coaching and what you're doing now, but also personally for me. I've told this story many times on the podcast. In fact, you're probably one of the maybe a handful of people that your name gets brought up in almost every single podcast in some form or fashion. And I think that's a real testament to the impact you've made on coaching, specifically with track and field. So I'm just super excited just to explore that and kind of just bring your full story to the masses, if you will.
Well, good. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, let's hop into it, man. I'm so excited to have you here. I just want to get started and just like blurt it all out. So let's kind of get in our Wayback Machine here. Talk to us about, where did track start for you? Were you an athlete? Where does track begin for you?
I wasn't much of a track athlete. Actually, my first interest in track, my high school won a regional championship, which is not that big a deal in Louisiana, to be honest with you. But I thought it was a big deal, and I wasn't on the team, so I went off of the team next year. And I ended up throwing the javelin and dabbling in some other events. But we didn't really have. It wasn't coaching like you think of. I mean, the coach collected athletes and got us out there and got us organized and that type of thing. And I'm very grateful for the fact that he had that approach. Even to this day, I hear sometimes high school athletes will come to me in the collegiate setting and say, my high school coach didn't know anything, blah blah blah, and I immediately I immediately curtail that conversation, because ultimately that's what's important. Is this is a person that sold you on the sport. Well, anyway, this person's coach email, he sold me on the sport, and I started kind of liking track. I wasn't great at it. I was much more of a football person than a track person, but I was out there and I enjoyed it and so forth. And then I don't know why, but as soon as I finished high school, I knew I wanted to coach. And even though I was majoring in engineering, because that's kind of what everybody expected me to do, I just kind of knew I wanted to coach, and I started coaching kind of part time and everything. And I was much more football than track, but because I had the interest in track, I started dabbling in track immediately upon my high school graduation. I was still, in college, taking classes my freshman year, and still started to help out at the high school and that type of stuff. And I'm just the kind of person that if I'm going to do track, I'm going to try to do it well, just like I tried to do football well. And that's kind of how I got started in track, so to speak. I was a pretty decent football player, but as a track athlete, I was really nothing special. I just liked it.
So what was it about coaching that, like you said, it was immediate, like, oh yeah, I'm going to coach? Was it your high school coach? Was it, did you see famous coaches, basketball, NFL at that time? And you're like, I want to be the man. What was it that, it seems like this was automatic for you.
Yeah, it was, and I can't answer that question accurately. When I think back at it, my high school coaches made athletics a positive thing for me, so I appreciated that. But I think it probably had something to do with personality. I kind of love the chess match of coaching, particularly coaching football. I kind of love the chess match. By nature, I'm a problem solver. If you give me three puzzles, I'm going to pick the hardest puzzle, and I'm going to obsess until I finish it. I'm kind of a problem solver by nature. That's probably why I started in engineering.
Right.
And I also like the fact that there are infinite variables in coaching. You play chess, and the rook can only move this way, and the knight can only move this way. Well, in coaching, there's infinite variables. There really is no single roadmap to success, and so many coaches do it in different ways. So to make a long story short, I think it's a profession that really fit my personality, and I saw it as a challenge. And then when you take into account the different personalities you have to deal with, that's just another level of complexity involved in coaching. And I think I probably took to it not only because I like sports, but also because I appreciated the challenges that it came along with it. I just found it tremendously challenging and interesting.
So you go to college and you're studying engineering, but you're starting to help out from the get-go, coaching track at the high school, doing some football. Were you participating in track at college?
No, we didn't even have a track team. And in fact, I ended up I went to LSU. This is a funny story, but I got recruited to play football at a couple of small schools, but they didn't have engineering schools.
Hmm.
So I decided I would go to LSU as a student um, to, to study engineering. And I turned down scholarships, not only athletic scholarships, even academic scholarships. But I was making like $500 a week catching crawfish in commercial fishing. And the tuition for college, my first semester, for the semester was $275. So it really wasn't that big. A scholarship wasn't what it is now.
First of all, I love how Louisiana and you are, man. You pay for college by crawfish.
No, and I hate to say it, as much as I love coaching, that's still the best job I ever had, to be frank with you. But, but in any case, so I went to LSU as an engineering student and was really miserable because my heart was really in coaching. And then I transferred to Nichols and I graduated from Nichols. I actually played football for a short time at Nichols as a walk-on. And mostly because I wanted to learn football to make me a better coach, more so than the fact that I was trying to go to the NFL or anything like that. But they're one of the schools that had actually kind of called me, when I was actually, coming out of high school and so forth. And that was the local school. And since it was the local school, I could go back to crawfishing again and make that money,
Did you end up getting your degree in engineering, or did you switch to some kind of
No,
education?
I ended up getting my degree in physical education. And yes, young people, at one time you could get a degree in physical education. I think my degree says physical education, recreation, and safety education with a minor in math education. And I was a math teacher at the high school level. And math because with the engineering, I had a lot of credits in math. So that's what I did. And frankly, I enjoyed being in the classroom, high school. I found that to be kind of a challenge as well. And, anyway, to teach kids math in courses they really didn't want to be in, to make them interesting and, help the kids succeed and all that. So I actually, never really taught PE. I was a coach, but I was pretty much more of a classroom teacher when I got started.
I should have taken a poll before we started. And, what do you think Boo Schexnayder got his undergrad degree in? Maybe PE, they would have said, but definitely would not have guessed just started out in engineering and then went math as far as, a math minor and everything. So you end up graduating from Nicholls State. Great school. We've had their now head coach on the podcast before. I love Nicholls State. It's a great little place, man. In fact, when I was at Troy University, we were in the Southland Conference. So we used to play Nicholls State in football all the time. Never knew where Thibodeau was. Just knew Nicholls State, the Colonels. So you get your degree, you go in your high school teaching. So are you high school coaching track and field right off the bat as well?
Immediately, yeah. I was already doing it kind of part-time, while I was in college, and I immediately moved in the same school in my alma mater into a full-time coaching role. And I was a defensive coordinator in football my very first year, and I was the track coach as well. And we kind of had a co-track coach kind of thing. There were two of us who kind of handled track together. So
what is your, I'm going to call it, style of coaching at that point? And I don't mean, we don't talk X's and O's and things like that, but more of like, now I know of you as a very, I'm going to call it, cerebral teaching type of coach. Were you that way from the get-go?
No, maybe in football, because I was well educated in football. I knew defensive schemes and all that, but in track, I knew nothing. I really didn't. So the thing that fueled my coaching then was insecurity and fear of failure more than anything else. So, my first season or two of coaching track, it was all about just finding, it was boys track is what we had, and finding any kid in the hallway that you thought could maybe walk and chew gum at the same time, getting them out there and see if they had a talent to do something, and I remember the state champions were in our league, were in our district, and they had lots of quality athletes. And anyway, I said, well, maybe we don't have a long jumper as good as this one, but we're going to have two who are decent. We're going to have two triple jumpers who are decent, and two, I'm going to find two kids who don't mind hurting a little bit to run the mile and run the 2 mile and go, so it was basically recruiting the hallways and so forth. And anyway, I was pretty successful as a defensive coordinator and became successful as a track coach more through that type of effort. But what happened as far as track was concerned, not long after that, was when Path and Seagrave and Maxwell and all of those guys came to LSU.
Right.
I was spending a whole weekend working on game plans for football, and I said, well, I spent about 5 minutes deciding what I'm going to do for track. There's got to be more to track than this,
Right.
So I started driving up to LSU when I could and watching track practices, and I was extremely fortunate because Dan Path took me kind of under his wing, and he became a mentor to me. I will forever be very appreciative to him for all of the time and energy that he put into me as a coach and as a person and everything. And he grabbed me at a very I guess critical time in my formation as a coach, because I kind of started to see things, and I kind of had some hunches on some things. And not only did Dan teach me a lot, but what Dan really did for me that was the most valuable was I was getting to the point where I was seeing some things a little different than what common coaching culture saw. I saw some things differently. I said, why do we train this way? Why do we use this technique? Some of that doesn't make sense. And Dan was the person who told me, no, you're seeing it clearly. You need to kind of trust yourself. You need to explore what you're seeing and so forth. And don't be afraid to go away from the common culture. And that's what Dan really did for me. I mean, I learned a lot from him as far as just factual material, but the encouragement he gave me to kind of not be afraid to go out on a branch or on a limb, so to speak, technically or training wise or whatever, if I had a reason for it and if you could support it with sports science and so forth. So the confidence that he gave me at that point in my career was extremely helpful.
Was that the state of coaching education at that point? Was another coach? I know we didn't have, obviously we didn't have YouTube, and maybe we didn't have camps and clinics, and we didn't have access to a guy like you back then. We didn't have email and phones and what have you. What was coaching education? You're talking about Dan Paff, which that's amazing. Is that what the state of coaching education was at that point?
Well, it was finding a mentor, so to speak. There really weren't many, at that time, USA track and field coaching education was in its infancy, just getting started.
Right.
And I kind of met Dan probably a little bit before that got started, or right around that time, but a little before actually, when I think about it. But basically, there were some clinics around, and you found a way to hustle and get to clinics and things like that. But there really wasn't anything that was, I guess you would say, curricular. There wasn't anything that was all encompassing. And that, I think, was a tremendous challenge to coaches in those days, because you'd go to one clinic and this highly successful coach said you should be running 300s. And this coach said, no, you run 200s, So you had all of this stuff, and there wasn't anything. You had to sort it all out.
Mm-hmm.
And you spent your whole darn life collecting workouts and collecting drills and all those things. And you never really knew why you were doing anything. And that's why, to me, coaching education was helpful, and why I felt a passion to advance coaching education, because it took all of these things that were out there and put them in context. So now all of a sudden, instead of all of these different workouts and we don't know what we're doing, now all of a sudden, because of this curriculum, I understand exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. So I know, therefore, I can do this workout, and be fine. I don't have to do these workouts because that stuff's covered elsewhere. So it kind of put everything in context and helped organize it in your own mind, so to speak.
As you were organizing this in your mind, and you're being mentored by Dan, and maybe you're doing some of the camps and clinics, is there I know a passion becomes coaching education for you, and we're going to get into that here later. Did you see it that early of like, man, if I could somehow bring all this together? Or were you still just, you're still a rookie at that point? Are you still just learning, trying to feel your way out?
I'm trying to bring it together, but bring it together for myself. I don't even think I'm worth getting in front of a group of people and speaking,
right,
at this point in my career yet,
Huh.
And that was another thing. Dan, says, you need to teach this coaching ed stuff, and he said, you're going to teach this level 2 class. I hadn't taught a level 1 class yet. He told me,
Wow.
you're going to teach a level 2 class. He said, "You sure you can handle it?" I said, if you think I'm ready, I'm ready, So, and that's kind of how it got started, I guess you would say. Yeah.
So
I
Dan,
had done I'd done a couple of clinics, like high school level clinics and things, but that's all I had done.
so Dan really saw something in you, not just as a coach, but as a coach of coaches.
Evidently so. I surely didn't see it in myself,
We
to be
rarely do,
frank.
right? That's why we need coaches.
Yeah. Yeah. I read somewhere where Nick Saban is fueled more by fear of failure than the desire to succeed. And I'm not sure I'm not that same person.
Interesting. You're taller than him, though, so that's you're on a better footing right there.
But his hair is better.
Yeah, he does have good hair. Yeah. So you continue coaching high school. Do you bounce around in the high school ranks, or do you go on to college coaching?
I thought I was a lifer in high school. I thought I was going to be a lifer. I was a defensive coordinator. I was highly thought of. I was getting some offers to coach small-time college football and that type of thing.
Wow.
And I was there in my hometown, and the track teams were doing really well. And all of a sudden, administration at the school changed, and I was a little disconcerted and whatever. And all of a sudden, I got a call, about possibly doing something in college track, and that's when I ended up at the junior college, at Blinn Junior College. I decided I just needed to do something different or try something different, and that was kind of when that all happened. So I only kind of got into track because I don't know, like I said, just I hate to say bad high school administration. I don't want to cast that stone,
Right.
because nothing's totally bad. But for me personally, I was growing at a rate and it was kind of confining and so forth. So I'm not blaming anyone in particular at the high school or anything, but I was kind of outgrowing the situation, to be honest with you, a little bit, and needed a place to kind of spread a little. And that lifeline came along, and next thing you know, I was a coward to just quit my high school job. So I actually took sabbatical to go to work at the junior college. Kind of thinking, well, if I don't like it, I can come back or whatever.
Wow.
So, but that's how I ended up at Blinn Community College,
And
out in Texas.
And I forget you're at Blinn. So this is a great opportunity because, half of our listeners right now are sitting there shaking their head going, "Oh yeah, Blinn Junior College. We remember that powerhouse." And then the other half are like, "Blinn Junior College, where is that? I've never heard of that. That's not Barton. That's not the Arizona junior colleges, et cetera." Right. So talk to us about Blinn, the other coaches that were there. I mean, it's got a great coaching tree itself out of Blinn, and just how darn good were you guys?
Yeah, we were really good. Of course, junior college is track without rules. There are no academic limitations or anything. And Blinn was an incredible situation because the president there of the college was very sold on track. His daughter run track, loved track. And he could always find an extra scholarship or whatever. So it was one of those situations. But the main reason we're successful was a chain of good coaches came through there. Coach Henry came through there, and then Coach Sylvie came through. And Coach Sylvie was the guy who brought me there. And Coach Sylvie was one of the best bosses I've ever had. He's known throughout the sport as a hardworking coach and also a little bit of a character. But let me tell you, I've never had a boss who was as good to me as Steve Sylvie was. I mean, he gave me complete autonomy over a group of athletes that I probably wasn't really qualified to coach just yet. And he threw a huge security blanket underneath you, safety net underneath you. And working for him was a huge positive at that point in my career. He really did help me by just giving me the kind of the freedom to kind of never, second guessing or anything like that.
When you go to Blinn, and even through your coaching at the high school, were you zeroing in on the horizontal jump specifically? Now, knowing with that caveat, you can coach anything actually, but you're much, much more well known as the long jump, triple jump coach. Were you steering that way early, or were you coaching other events?
I coached everything in high school. The reason I got to be known as a long and triple jump coach was because when I was in high school, every school that I had to beat would put their best athletes into sprints. And I found that if I took my best athletes and put them in long jump, triple jump, hurdles, and those types of events where a little more coaching was involved and maybe even a little less athletic competition, I could get a little more bang for my buck. So I was turning out good long jumpers and triple jumpers and hurdlers and people like that at that time. So I got to be known as a jumps coach, but it was strictly by accident in that regard,
Yeah, it's
So
not like you were a jumper coming out of high school. You're more javelin and some other events, really.
oh no, I got to be the Olympic coach in the event, and I never even tried long jump in a track meet. I still haven't tried it.
We'll just we've skipped that stage. Then don't go trying it, coach.
Mhm.
So give us some specifics here when you say Blinn was good, because I've heard some stories about Blinn, how good Blinn was, but there's other people have no context at all what good means. I coached JUCO for a year, and I had to go up against my buddy Lance Brahman at Barton, and this is when they would win. You remember, because Walter Davis and all those guys,
Yeah.
you end up coaching them. So that was during that time frame. Blinn would win. I'm probably going to be way off on this because of my memory, but they'd win nationals by 100 points. I mean, they were by far the greatest team around. And my understanding is Blinn would have beaten those teams to a pulp.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. And again, you had good coaches, you had a great president, you had almost unlimited resources. It was a perfect storm kind of scenario, And to put it in context, even to this day, Blinn would be in the top 5 nationally in the NCAA Division I championships in any meet, that we go to, the type of athletes that we had back then and so forth, So they were really, really, really good. Really good.
How many years at Blinn? And
Just one.
Just one. Okay. And so where and why next?
Well, I liked it. I wanted to stay. There's a law that says if you take sabbatical, and you have to go back. If you don't go back, you have to pay back all the money. Well, I thought they would waive that for me, but they didn't. So I ended up going back to high school for 1 year. And then it was the year after that, I kind of had my eyes open to leave. And that year after that was when Coach Lsu at what was then University of Southwestern Louisiana, now Louisiana Lafayette, gave me an opportunity to go over there and coach the jumpers at that school.
Did you meet a lot of coaches in that year at Blinn? Did you meet a lot of college coaches from recruiting the Blinn athletes? Did you start kind of building network out that way?
Yeah, it did help somewhat, it wasn't a lot, but it was a sizable number, enough to get help. I had a few contacts, but interestingly, the contacts I made there weren't the ones that got me into my next collegiate job. I guess it was an old high school, Coach Lsu and I coached high school at the same time. Coach Lsu, who was the head coach at ULL, was a longtime Louisiana high school coach. And anyway, and so was I. And I still kind of had more high school roots than anything else. And we had him, and of course, Coach Baton, who had been at Blinn as well, was his assistant. And again, longtime high school coach. So it was a whole nest of high school coaches moving up. And that's why I always say to this day, if you can coach, you can coach, and everybody thinks that, college coaches are automatically better. Part of my recruiting pitch to this day is that just because you're going to college doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get a better coach. I tell that to recruits to kind of make them stop and think sometimes. And I think nobody would disagree with that, But in any case, so I ended up there and was coaching the jumpers at ULL, and I stayed there for 3 years.
Where is coaching education with you at that time?
Oh, I'm in it deep.
Is that right?
I've already taught a couple of level 2 schools when I made that move and so forth. So yeah, I'm kind of in it deep, and I'm starting to become a fairly popular clinician, on clinic circuit and that type of stuff. It's, and this is when I'm starting to get a little more confident, because I'm starting to realize, because of the reaction I'm getting from people, that, I must be pretty good at this clinic stuff, because people are calling me, and once I talk in one place, I get offers to speak in other places and so forth. So that's when it all kind of started to grow during my early years at USL.
So you're doing now, I'm gonna call a ton of different clinics and coaching education. Are you writing any of the curriculum at this point? Or are you still teaching?
Not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet, but that's coming. Wasn't long before I started doing some rewriting kind of stuff with the USA track and field stuff and everything. And Dan and all those guys put that curriculum together. It was pretty much, they were busy, and, there was a ton of good material. You remember, you've seen those materials back in the day. It was like tons and tons of appendices and all those types of things, but there really wasn't much text per se to kind of put it all in context or whatever, So that was kind of the challenge, at that point, as far as the rewriting was concerned, to just kind of take all the good material that was there and just kind of sort it all out and make it into a true curriculum rather than just a collection of materials, so to speak. The stuff that Dan had done and Bob Myers had done and Noka stuff and all, just kind of getting all that stuff kind of organized, just kind of, form it into an outline a little bit more and that type of thing.
And to give full respect to those kind of pioneers of curriculum-based coaching education, rattle off some of the names that were part of that original group. I know you mentioned Dan, who is, I'm totally blanking on his name, the distance coach up in Colorado.
Oh, V Hill was kind of the driving force.
Yeah, he was a big part.
Yeah, V Hill was kind of the driving force. In fact, I think the thing that spurred it more than anything else was V Hill, if I remember correctly, did his dissertation on coaching education programs, like internationally, like a kind of a survey or research project into international coaching education programs. And I think that was kind of a spur to the whole thing. But I remember people like Al Beta and Vern Gambetta were involved. And of course, Dan was involved. I hate to say names because I'm leaving off a bunch of names. Lauren was involved in the early stages of it as well. I remember Bill Berg being somebody who was heavily involved. It seemed like Louisiana was a nucleus, Minnesota was kind of a nucleus. Anyway, I'm drawing some blanks here. And again, I hate to leave out certain names, but it was, I would say, a group of probably a dozen to 15 people who were really involved in getting all the whole coaching education movement going, I guess you would say.
Yeah, I put you on the spot there. So
Winkler was another one.
Yeah, that's right, Gary. Right, absolutely. And you mentioned V Hill doing his dissertation on kind of the state of coaching education in the world. Were we behind in America in, I'm gonna call it, formalized coaching education, not just buddies talking at the track, actual curriculum? Were we behind in America at that point?
Yes, I think we were. To be honest with you, given this number of people we have that are certified coaches and the population of our country, some people claim we're still behind, but at least now we have good programs in place.
Yeah. There's really no excuse nowadays. I mean, even
exactly.
when I was coaching 2005 and prior, it was, there were a lot of opportunities. We didn't have USTF CCCA coaching education back then. We pretty much only had USATF, but it was still kind of hard to get to. It was once a year for level 2, et cetera. Now it feels like, especially now kind of, as we're coming hopefully to the other side of COVID, now it seems like you can't help but trip over a Zoom call with a good coach or, education clinics all on Zoom. Like you ain't even got to go travel anymore. And amazing coaches doing these things. This ain't me doing a coaching clinic. These are some amazing coaches that are sharing some of their knowledge out there. So I like that where we are in regards to that open access to coaching education.
I hope, the Zoom has been wonderful because of the access people have. I just hope that we never go completely to Zoom, because I just remember the interactions during the classes and the interactions between the classes were often so valuable. So I hope that we never totally lose sight of what face-to-face education is all about.
1000%. And I think about regular education in that same way. Getting your undergrad or your MBA. Certainly there's some value. Again, access is a big deal, right? To being able to do it through a Zoom type, online type education. But boy, there is a lot of extra added value face-to-face in a group of people that are unlike you and learning how they do things. And you're like, man, I didn't know you could coach the hammer without a hammer cage. What am I doing? I should be able to teach the hammer now, So it's great to see that variety and how people, coaches just get it done in a lot of senses. So it's great to be around fellow coaches that are getting it done. You can learn invaluable stuff that way. So how many years at Southwest Louisiana? Or is that right? Southwest Louisiana is what it was called.
University of Southwest Louisiana. University of Raging Cajuns.
Still the Raging Cajuns.
I was there 3 years. And my first year, I didn't have too much. I was able to get a really good triple jumper in as a recruit at midterm. And then the next year I produced a bunch of All-Americans. And then that triple jumper 2 years later ended up winning the NCAA title. So I was at a mid-major, and I was developing All-Americans and had an NCAA champion at mid-major. A lot of people think I ended up at LSU because I was from Louisiana or I was lucky or had a connection. But I remind the mid-major people who are kind of whining, that I don't get a break. Well, I didn't really get a break. I kind of made a break, when my triple jumper in Tennessee won the NCAA title, from a mid-major school. That was something that kind of opened some eyes, and I already had a pretty good reputation as a jumps coach through some of the clinic stuff, but I think maybe people realized that I wasn't just a clinician, that I could actually produce points, and produce on the track.
So as you were coaching those All-Americans and you win a national title, I mean, that is awesome. My last coaching job was at Mississippi State in the SEC against you, by the way. So like terrible. This guy's who got me out of coaching. I was like, I can't beat this guy. I'm getting out of
No,
it.
your hurdlers ran pretty good, but that's another story for another day.
Exactly. But I do, my roots are at Ball State and Troy University and JUCO, that's where my roots are. So I do love seeing the Southwest Louisiana All-American or national champion, Middle Tennessee, those kind of schools. I don't know that it means more. I just know that it's a lot under resourced there and the expectations are lower. So to overcome those is just phenomenal to me. I love seeing that.
And I enjoyed it. It was I was broke coaching there financially, but because I took a pay cut to go there. You talk
Right.
about paying dues and whatever, but to go from high school, whatever, to go there was a big pay cut. Because all I really got was a stipend to coach there, and I was kind of hustling money on the side. But I decided if I wanted to do this, you pay dues, and that's, what it is. At some point in time, you step backwards, and that was my point at which I stepped backwards. But it was a really fun level to coach at, because you could get, sometimes there were good athletes that had an asterisk on it that you could get into your school that might not be able to get into another school. Or sometimes one of the things is, because you're regional, you don't make recruiting mistakes, because you're always, I'm there in Louisiana, so I'm seeing high school athletes compete all the time in that area. So you pick out these gems that are kind of underdeveloped, and the kids you're getting better than, when I'm recruiting at LSU, I know the kids mark. I meet them on a visit, but I haven't seen them run over and over again. Because the recruiting is regional based, it's a lot more efficient, and I think you make less mistakes, to be honest with you. So in that way, shape, or form, you kind of end up being efficient, and every once in a while, you can kind of slay the giant a little bit.
So since you're not trying to recruit quote unquote 50 states or even the whole world, right, in today's world, you're getting a little deeper because you're basically recruiting 100 miles from campus. So I get to see the kids repeatedly and do other events and things like that. So I get a little bit more knowledge of each kid.
Yeah, absolutely. And even when I went to LSU, to some extent, that was still a little bit of my MO, because I knew the Louisiana kids by heart. Like I'd seen them come up and everything, and I knew which ones were really good and which ones I needed to get, and I knew which ones, if they didn't qualify, I had to get to a JUCO and then try to get them on the after, that type of thing. So, if you look at my collegiate career, a lot of the good ones I had were Louisiana kids.
Yeah, right. Yeah. At this point, is it fair to say football coaching is done? You're all in on track at this point?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, I'm done. I've never lost my interest in football, though. Like, even to this day, if there's a football clinic in Baton Rouge and I'm off, I'm going to go sit and listen to the lectures in the football clinic. So I've never completely gotten out of it. There's nothing I enjoy better than going to watch high school football on like Thursday night or Friday night, because I still have a lot of, because I enjoy watching the good players play. And I still have a lot of friends who coach high school football. So I like to go watch their teams and that type of stuff. So football is still a passion of mine, even to this day. And I can still X and O with the best of them. But it's nice because I don't have a team on the field. I never lose anymore.
That's right. No armchair quarterbacks for me.
I haven't lost in years, man.
Do you have an affinity towards one level over the other, whether it's high school versus college versus NFL?
I really love high school football.
Is that right?
Yeah. During the little time when I was out of collegiate coaching altogether, and I was doing consulting work and such, and I could pretty much make my own schedule. It was a game on Thursday, a game on Friday, maybe a game on Saturday. If the game on Friday wasn't any good, I'd leave at halftime and go to a different game on Friday. It's just what I like. I really like watching athletes do their thing. That's what I really like. I just love seeing young kids do things. When I was coaching at LSU, the most fun days were the days when we hosted a high school meet. there in the indoor track or whatever.
Yeah.
And I could just sit by that wall and just watch kids run and watch kids jump and watch kids throw and just watch them happy when they did well and watch them pissed off when they lost, and just see not only the competition and athleticism, but the whole drama unfold,
So where does that come from, Boo? Because, you've coached at the highest level. You mentioned, coaching on the Olympic team. You've coached umpteen million NCAA All-Americans and national champions. But I mean, I've known you for quite a while now. Your face lit up when you were talking about going to the game on Thursday, going to the game on Friday, going to another game on Friday. Like, where does that level of passion come from?
I don't know. I like athletes. I like watching athletes do their thing. I just love athletes from the standpoint of athletes are risk takers. Athletes are people who take risks and to try to do things, and they kind of forget about themselves and they give of themselves. I just like the whole human drama of it and just the athletic mindset, so to speak, And I just like that. I love watching the meet and watching the kid get pissed off because they lost, or pissed off because they ran bad or whatever. I love watching the agony in their faces when they get hurt and they felt like they could have done. I just, all of that human drama, whatever. I find it extremely intriguing. And I just have tremendous respect for anybody who goes out there and lays it on the line, so to speak, and it is out there trying to win something and competing just for the sake of competition, not winning, just to say I'm the best, just to do as well as I can do. And I mean, that's something that I sometimes I worry that we lose as a society is, I mean, there's value in doing your best just because it's your best, and sports are just where that still happens. And that's why I'm such a big fan of sports,
So where do we go from Southwest Louisiana?
LSU.
Straight to LSU. And
I went from there to LSU.
And you must have known somebody, or how'd you get that job?
Well, I mean, I've been around the LSU program and I knew Coach Henry well. I never dreamed that he would offer me a job, but he did. And so I'd had success at USL, and he knew me because back in my high school days, I was even officiating some meets at LSU, working meets and that type of stuff. So he kind of knew me, and he called me and offered me a job. So, I didn't want to go. I quit LSU twice. Like I said, I quit as a student. I had started a PhD at LSU one time. I quit that. I tell people I've only quit 2 times in my life. LSU the first time, LSU the second time. So now I'm like, do I want to go to LSU? So I went to USL. I said, look, if y'all make me full time, I'll stay. And they said, no, go. Because, the finances just weren't good there.
Right.
So anyway, so that's how I ended up at LSU.
There wasn't any, you and Coach Henry didn't pass through at Blinn, right? There was a separation.
We did not.
Right. Okay.
We did not. If I had to guess, I would say Coach Henry probably, the fact that I coached in junior college and he probably liked that.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say that's why I got the job.
Right.
But I think that probably, I think he likes JUCO people. I just think he thinks JUCO is a good level and you learn, and the type of kids you deal with, and the ability to do without sometimes or whatever, right. I think he thinks is a positive. And I think that's probably was part of it.
Well, and Coach Henry's a winner, right? He likes to see people develop positively. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say those kids you got at Southwest Louisiana weren't the number 1 kid in the nation coming out of high school, and yet they go on and win the national title and All-American. So I'm sure.
Yeah, he saw those kids doing well. If I'd been failing, I doubt that he would offer me a job.
Right,
in fact,
right.
I'm pretty sure,
Yeah. He's a smart guy. He talent identification in athletes and coaches.
Yeah, that's one thing about Coach Henry. He's, that's one thing, and surrounding himself with good coaches has always been his deal.
Yeah. So what was it like going to LSU? So you're from Louisiana. So LSU is the mega flagship of the state. You had started school there. Coach Henry's there. So can I assume they're winning titles at this point? What year was this?
95.
So are you winning titles? Is LSU winning titles at that point?
Yep. The women are.
They won 25 in a row or something, 100 in a row, whatever it was. They were just winning. So what's it like expectation wise for you? Do you get a little nervous, like, oh man, now this is the big boy stage, I've got to step up? Or is this just coach? I'm the coach, be the coach?
I went through about a 6-month phase where I did a very poor job. I kind of thought I had to be a certain way,
Mhm.
and it didn't work well, and my athletes didn't perform well. When the kid I got at midterm was the kid that was doing the best, and the one I had through all the fall weren't doing as well, I realized I needed to kind of figure it out.
Mm.
So it took me a little bit of adjustment, to be honest with you. It shouldn't have, but it did. So, and I'll be frank with you, like I had been coaching track a long time by the time I got there, and I was sitting in staff meetings listening to the other coaches talk. And these other coaches have been in Division I a long time. And there were times I didn't even know what the hell they were talking about. Like, because this level is like totally foreign to me. So I think I was a little bit overwhelmed, and it took me a little while to get it going. My first, semester or whatever wasn't good. And it was until kind of the end of outdoor where I kind of got some traction. And then the next year I just came out and just was myself. Like, if I was mad, I screamed. If I was happy, I laughed. I just was myself, and then everything pretty much clicked real well after that.
That's a great lesson, because whether it's a school's name or a boss, Pat Henry in this example, sometimes we do get caught into this. Well, what do they expect? Like, how am I supposed to act? When really what got you the job for you specifically was you being you. And so there was a little bit of like, oh, now I'm okay. Coach Henry, maybe I need to do this, or I'm at LSU, so maybe I need to do this. And in reality, you needed to take a deep breath and continue what you're doing and continue to improve in how you were doing it.
Yeah, I've never been the most confident person in the world, to be totally frank with you. At least, and I surely wasn't in that situation. But again, like I said, I just, at some point in time, it just kind of clicked. I started feeling a little more comfortable, and I could just be myself. And from that point on, everything went real well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I know you. So you being yourself, that makes a lot of sense. That's what would actually work out. So you get to LSU in 95, right?
Mm-hmm.
95 through, when did you leave LSU?
I stayed there through 07.
07, right.
Mm-hmm.
So what an unbelievable time. Talk to us about, so how did you guys gel as a coaching staff? Because I mean, you're winning titles left and right. It's kind of like the old blend days, if you will. You're winning, every title's hard, but I mean, you're winning a lot. You're specifically in your category, lots of All-American certificates are coming your way.
No, it was great because you had great athletes, and you're working around great coaches. And I'll give Coach Henry tremendous credit because he is the person who, to me, was the absolute master as far as like setting up a culture, like a team culture. And I don't even know if he could say exactly what he did, but he just had this thing he used to say all the time: just do the right thing every day, just do the right thing every day. And anyway. Under him, frankly, it was easy to coach winners, because the culture was there. He was pretty much supportive of what you did. Now, if you didn't do your job, you wasn't going to be there very long. But if you were good, if you were successful and whatever, he would support you. And there's a couple of times, not very often, where a kid would come in and, I'm not really happy with Coach so and so. Well, where do you want to transfer? So I don't want to transfer. Well, says, well, you need to work it out with Coach so and so. So it was a very supportive kind of atmosphere. And anyway, so working for him, everybody you have ups, everybody you have downs, but that was one thing, was that the climate was the culture of the team was a good one. You could produce there, whatever.
And as you're going through 95 through 07, I pick you up around, I'd say 02, 03 in my career is when I know who Boo is, and Boo's teaching level 2, et cetera. Are you doing during this time frame more? I don't know how you could, but are you doing more clinics in coaching education? Are you doing more curriculum writing? What's that side of it look like for you?
I'm doing a lot of that stuff, and pretty much had to typing anytime I was on a plane, dead times in the hotel room, pretty much had the computer, going all the time. And of course, Pat left in 04, and Coach Shaver took over. At that point, I decided not to pursue that job. I felt I was more of an assistant coach. I was more of an on-the-track coach than an administrator. I didn't have confidence in my abilities as an administrator, to be very frank with you. And anyway, so I got to work for him for 3 years. And I'll be very frank with you. It got to the point where I was kind of experiencing some burnout. You know, I remember one time I went to one of the, you probably been listened to the same lecture, Mike, the coaching burnout lecture at level 2.
Yep.
And I remember out of 19 signs, I had like 18 of them, you know, and because it was all encompassing, you know, and it got to the point where I'm coaching postgrads, you know, so the college kids are starting practice around Labor Day. The postgrad kids are going through September. So you're coaching 13 months out of the year now, and it just never stopped. And there were years when you're coaching 30 something people or whatever. And I could grind through it. But what I started noticing was my eye was not as sharp. I wasn't as perceptive about picking up signs. I wasn't quite as discriminating in the training that I was writing as I probably should have been, you know. So I tell people, if you got my workouts from my last couple of years at LSU, those aren't the ones you want to copy, probably, you know. But and I'll be frank with you, you know, expressing my own weaknesses, like you get to the point when you're burnt out like that you're like, oh, well, I don't really need to call this recruit this week. I can maybe skip this week and call him next week, you know. And then that's when I realized that if that's what you're doing, it's time for me to bow out, you know. So I decided to take my retirement at that point.
So, you know, I'm going to talk about two things here: ego and self-awareness. Self-awareness is really hard, right? Like that's one of the things we need a lot of help on personally. And a lot of that sometimes comes from a coach, whether it's a athletic coach and you're an athlete, maybe a fellow coach on your staff. Even in the business world, we have coaches out here that, you know, it's called a blind spot for a reason, right? It's blind, so you need others. Mm-hmm. How were you able? You talk about the burnout, and maybe I wasn't doing all the things that I should, the recruiting, my workouts weren't as sharp. I wasn't seeing things in the curriculum writing. Was there a coach of you that was helping you see this, or how did you come to that self-awareness?
I think I came about it myself, but I'm not saying that there weren't people who saw it before me, you know, so I'm not going to be conceited enough to think that I dug my way out of it or picked it all up myself. Yeah. You know, and my reputation might have worked against me in that respect, because probably if I'd have been a little less developed as a coach or a little less established as a coach, maybe somebody would have grabbed me and pulled me on the side and shook me up a little bit or whatever.
Absolutely. Anyway, right. Speaking truth to power is tough. Right. And, you know, I think about, like, when you give that example there, and I think about, you know, I'm at Mississippi State, you're Boo, and I see you do something like, well, that's uncharacteristic. I probably would have written it down. I'm like, oh, well, I guess I got to start doing that. That's you know, that's how you perpetuate mistakes, right?
So sadly, Coach Shaver didn't get the best Boo. You know, that's why I tried to really make it up to him this second time around.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other word I wanted to talk about was ego, and ego is not necessarily a bad ego is bad, but ego and self-worth and self-esteem can go hand in hand. You mentioned, you know, you're at LSU for a long time. You've got a million accolades at this time. Was there ever a desire to be a head coach? You kind of expressed some of that self-awareness of like, yeah, I don't know that I was really strong administratively anyway, but was there ever a thought of leading your own program?
No, I didn't. In fact, sometimes I think that I made a mistake not trying to pursue the LSU job, you know, but I just literally did not feel prepared at that point for some reason. And, you know, it's honestly, I don't know that I have the desire to do that at this stage in my life, but now I feel like I can handle it easily. But it's funny, you go through those stages, you know, and again, I didn't. I just saw myself more as a person who was going to be on the track and, you know, more of the Guy Friday kind of person, you know, right hand to the head coach as opposed to the head coach, whatever. In some ways, I regret that decision because financially, you know, I'm behind the 8 ball, you know, and that's why I advise everybody I talk to at this point forward to don't do what I did. You know, if you have an opportunity to move up, you do what you have to do, and because ultimately, you know, financially, you have to take care of yourself. You don't know what you have, you know, financially. Frankly, I'm not where I'd like to be. I'm okay, and we'll be okay. Julie and I'll be fine, but I'm not. I wish I had more for her.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. You know, that's a real passion of mine for coaches. As much as I loved the coaching education side, and it definitely changed my career, and so much, in fact, that I started teaching level ones. I taught, I don't know, maybe 30 of them, and loved it, enjoyed being able to help other coaches. My real passion now with coaches is that off the track stuff, your financial health, your own physical health, your relationship health. So, I appreciate you being open and authentic there, of like, man, I'm behind the 8 ball here. Because when we're 25, 30-year-old, 35-year-old coaches, we're not thinking about our 401ks and IRAs. We're thinking about the next job or the next track meet or the next recruit. We're thinking about everything except, well, what's life going to look like when I'm 65 or 70? Do I want to retire? Can I retire one day? Or am I literally going to have to coach? It's one thing if you get to coach to be 80 and 90, but there's a different fact if you have to coach to 80 or 90 because of retirement and lack of funds there.
No, you're totally correct. I was a coach called me the other day, somebody I've kind of mentored a little bit and had a dilemma. I've been offered a job that is better, and I'd like to take it, but there's another job that I'm up for that's even better than this one. So I'll say, well, take the one that you just got offered, and then if the other one comes through, will you leave and go? Well, so I would only be there a couple of weeks. I'm like, so what? I understand and I really appreciate your ethics in that situation, but I tell coaches now, the bottom line is no one is going to take care of you but you. That's the nature of that business, and ultimately your responsibility is to your family, to do the best for your family, And sometimes I hear coaches say things like, oh, I don't want to leave the kids I have and all that. Well, yeah, but how they won't hire a better coach? So don't be so selfish to think that just because you're leaving, everything's going to fall apart,
Hey, that was a really interesting way you just said that. So I've talked before about the selfless versus selfish aspect, right? And that, coaches are so selfless, right? Like they spend all this time 24/7 with other people's kids, but yet that's also selfish, right? Because they're neglecting their family and friends and their lives, etc. I love how you said, how do you know? I mean, this is real. You're talking about ego here. This is ego. How do you know by you leaving, they're not going to get someone better for these kids? Wow. Like, that's kind of like truth bomb right there. Like sit back and think about that. Holy cow.
That's a lecture I give young kids all the time, a fork in the road. It's not like there's always a right fork and a wrong fork. Most of the time you can make them both right. You can make them both wrong by looking at your attitude and the way you handle it, in those kind of situations. So I just kind of recommend people, just as you move through the profession, just kind of take care of yourself, take care of your family, because ultimately, nobody else is gonna do that. Everybody's got their own set of interests, and that doesn't make anybody a bad person, but that's just the way the world works. Yeah.
The number one excuse you hear is, I don't want to leave the kids. Well, if that's the case, then you're never going to leave ever. And I hate, sometimes somebody will rebut that and go, well, the kids will leave, especially in today's transfer portal world, right? But it's like, that's not the same. You're putting apples and oranges together there. It's more about, you got into coaching to coach. You didn't get into coaching to coach at LSU specifically. You got into coaching to coach. So whether that's a local high school, a Power 5, a JUCO, that's the profession and the passion you have. Take care of yourself along the way, so you're taking care of your family and your future.
Yeah, exactly. I understand that and I appreciate it. I mean, I'm the person who tried to stay at USL rather than going to LSU. As stupid as that might sound, I tried to stay. So I get it, but I'm beyond that. I've been on the other side of that now, and I understand. Ultimately nobody's going to take care of you but you, and it bothers me because if you're going to coach, you're going to pay a price in your family life. You're going to pay a price in everything, and that's why you got to like it. That's why you got to love it. And I say to this day, if I was 40 again, the thing I would probably do, honestly, is not start a track and field academy. I would probably start a coaches union, because just to make working conditions better for coaches and whatever, because it's gotten to the point, where so many people are telling coaches what to do. And in some situations, they've lost control of the process, but they're still responsible for the product, and I sympathize with that, because in many cases, coaches put up, I think, with way more than they should in some working scenarios, and if you say that, that's not a popular thing, because immediately somebody thinks of, well, what Coach Saban has or what Coach Krzyzewski has or whatever, but they're not understanding that the typical NCAA coach coach is an assistant soccer coach who makes $45,000 a year. And all it takes is one athlete who gets kind of angry with them and goes to an athletic director to complain, and they're out the window, with no recourse, whether they're, even though the accusations or whatever it might be, that kind of bothers me. And it bothers me because coaches do so much for young people, and there's bad apples in every profession, but I'm just a firm believer that as a coach, you are you're an extremely important person in an athlete's life, because the coach is still the person who's kind of making athletes understand how to win with grace and lose with dignity. And sometimes a coach teaches the lesson that the problem with you is you, and there aren't many people who are still doing that anymore. So I would hate to think where we are without the coaches, and I just don't want to make coaching any harder than it is already.
Yeah, agree 100% right. I mean, the positive impact a coach makes on young people today, and right where your feet are. So whether you're in Chanute, Kansas or New York City, it doesn't matter. You have young people right there in front of you and you're making a positive impact. That's the power of a coach, bar none. So I'm going to put coaching education to the side for a second. You go through 07 and you take an early retirement. You couldn't have been, you mentioned about if you could go back to be 40 again, you could have been 45.
I think it was 46.
Yeah. Okay. I was gonna say that's you're around. It was my age. I'm not thinking about early retirement. How are you able to early retire?
Well, I had a lot of years. Remember, I taught high school many years in the same retirement system I was in at LSU.
Right.
That's why you couldn't have pulled me out of LSU with a tractor and a crowbar, because the retirement years were all the same as the high school.
Makes
so
sense.
I got lucky in that regard.
Yeah.
And I just did the math. I crunched the numbers, and I said, well, yeah, if I hang in there longer, I can up my retirement benefit. But I started looking at the money I could collect, and I did number crunching and whatever. And I said, the financial play here is to take the retirement and just go do something else. And that's what I did.
So what does a 46-year-old, highly successful track coach do at retirement at 46? What was the something else?
Well, what I did was, this guy had offered me an opportunity to run a training center. And I said, oh, okay, well, this will work. Although that wasn't something I really wanted to do long term or whatever. And that's what I did. And anyway, but what was interesting was when I left LSU, the phone ran off the hook. That's when the clinics and the consulting and all blew up, because
Really?
the phone just started ringing off the hook. Look, you could never do my clinic because you were at LSU. Now you're coming up. All right. I want you to come watch practices for 2 days and debrief us or whatever. You could never do that because you were at LSU. I want you to come now. And that's when all of that happened. So I was extremely fortunate. And I tell that to this day to a lot of coaches, who are kind of worried about what the next step might be. Is you never know who wants you right now, who thinks you won't go because of the job that you have now, So anyway, that's what happened. And that developed into a pretty good business as far as consulting work and that type of stuff, clinics and such. And then right around that time was when Track and Field Academy, we kind of started, getting that going. I think it was 09 when we kind of made the decision to get that going.
Yeah, there's not there's a collection of, I'm gonna call them post-collegiate coaches, but I don't know that there's a lot that I'm going to call travel and consult, right? They have their training group and they stay there, and maybe they do some camps and clinics and such, but they would never, that I've seen, I maybe just be out of the picture, don't go to another program and evaluate and help that coach move on, or, advance, I should say, not move on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. So
yeah, I learned that financially it could work. At least it could for me, because I was fortunate to have a good reputation and some success behind my belt. But I learned that it could work because in all of these so-called performance training businesses, the facility is a huge overhead. Right. So I learned that if I just deal with the coaches and just help the coaches, I have no overhead. And so it ended up working out pretty good. I had some really good months financially doing that stuff. When I had a bad month, I had a retirement check. So the retirement check kind of gave me the flexibility to kind of take some risks professionally in that regard.
That's interesting. So are you coaching at all at this point? Or are you just coaching coaches?
Pretty much just coaching coaches. Now, there were some situations where I was spot coaching, like I fly me in to work with so-and-so for a couple of days because of a particular problem or whatever. I made a couple trips up to Canada to kind of, troubleshoot particular athletes or whatever. Might have been a couple instances where athletes came into me for training camps or whatever. So I'm spot coaching, but I'm not coaching anybody on a like day-to-day, you're my athlete basis.
So they say it's like riding a bike in regards to a lot of things, right? Like you learned how to ride a bike as a kid and maybe you take 10 years off, you can hop right on a bike and ride. And that might be true. I haven't rode a bike in a while, but I bet if I got on, I probably could ride that bike, but I wouldn't be as good because I didn't have the practice. Are you getting out of practice during this time?
No, you're going to ride the bike better. Getting away from it, you come back to it, you see it so much more clearly. You
Really?
really see it clearly. You remember, I threw in the junk pile, all of these years of burnout and everything that I had with me. And all of a sudden, like my eyes are working better, my perception's working better. I'm much more into, so everything is much sharper. Like I can now go to a coach and watch that coach work and pick up 3 or 4 things that I might have never seen before. Yeah, believe it or not, you get out of it and come back in it, you see it much, much more clean. Well, the education people figured it out years ago. That's why sabbaticals are there, for that opportunity, and there's something to be said for that. But anyway, just being in a different scenario, different. And there are some people who are like that. Like there's a couple of coaches I know who can't coach a lick, but they'll come and watch your athletes train and they'll point out 3 or 4 key things that you're missing because some people have that gift. And I think that I became a lot more perceptive in that particular regard at that time. So I think you'd ride that bike better, Mike.
Huh. My kids will be so happy when I tell them this. So okay, you're doing this and doing really grasping the coaching of coaches at this point. What do you come straight back to LSU? Is that correct?
Well, I came back to LSU. I was gone for 10 years.
Yeah, that's gonna say
Yeah,
what was the drawback?
they call me.
It can't be the only people that called you and probably not the only time they called you specifically.
Well, I think most people realize I wasn't going to just go anywhere, and so
Sure.
I got a couple offers, but nothing. But it was just Coach Shaver. He had a really good throws coach who left him kind of abruptly in September, and he just felt like I can't hire somebody in September. Can you just fill in, so to speak? Can you just fill in the year for me? I said, okay, here's how much it's going to cost you. And LSU was willing to do it. So I did it. And I like being back in it. He says, how can we keep you involved? Do you want to continue? I said, Coach, I can coach throws, but I can't go to Europe and recruit throwers. I don't have those connections that those throws guys have.
Right.
And so what if I was the strength coach for the program? Then I can kind of continue to be involved and, and maybe even touch on other kids in other event areas and so forth. So he says, okay. So he goes to administration and they created a position and here I am.
So 2 unique things in that story right there, Boo. One, that you came back to coach throws and Coach Shaver, like it was an automatic, like, hey, can you come coach throws? Like it wasn't like, I don't know, I think Boo can do it for a year. Like it was like, hey man, I need help. Come help me. What has led you to be able to coach throws at this point? Is it just a transference of all the other things that you know biomechanically or?
Well, I had always handled throws. I coached throws in high school. I coached decathletes in the throws. I coached heptathletes in the throws. And I'm a high school coach. I can coach anything from scratch, and I'm not saying that I have the level of sophistication in the throws or whatever, but I know how to train athletes and I got an eye for basic biomechanics. And most people complicate it too damn much anyway. So it worked out okay. I had a couple kids did real well, so in any case.
So
And and I came back and Coach Shaver was just phenomenal as far as accommodating me. I had a couple of obligations that I couldn't get out of, and I said, Coach, I'd love to do it, but here are these obligations I have. He says, no problem, and anyway, he was extremely flexible and continues to be work with me great. I paid some compliments to Coach Sylvia, but I've been blessed to have some really good bosses.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
Coach Shaver for the last 5 years has been phenomenal to me.
Yeah.
I could not ask for anyone to be any more helpful and supportive than he's been for these last few years. It's been incredible.
Yeah, I will say I love Coach Shaver. He is one of the most upfront, and I mean this all in the positive ways, upfront, honest, what you see is what you get. He's going to tell you the truth, even if it's to his detriment. I think he's such a truthful guy. He taught my level 2 sprints the year after I did jumps with you. And at the end so in the middle of level 2, Al Schmidt came to me and told me I was officially hired at Mississippi State. So at the end, we were going down and shaking the instructor's hands and all that. And Dennis takes my hand and he pulls me in real close and he goes, "You're the enemy now." And I remember thinking, "Oh, welcome to the SEC, buddy." So and the other aspect that was interesting of that story, Boo, was are you the only track and field specific strength and conditioning coach in the country?
I doubt it.
But I can't tell you 5 other
Jimmy,
coaches off the top of my head.
I don't know. I don't think that's the case. I think there are some other schools that have somebody that only does track and field.
Is that right?
I'm probably just the most notorious one.
Yeah, you were starting to say Jimmy Radcliffe, I think, and
that's it for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. That'd be one that I could have come up with, but it's an extremely unique position and really maybe forward thinking by you and Dennis in regards to this as well. So there's a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, there's a stereotype of conflict between the traditional strength and conditioning coach and the track and field coach. This seems to solve any of that potential conflict or prejudice of conflict, if you will.
Yeah, I think so. I during my 10 years out, I probably refereed more cat fights between track coaches and strength and conditioning coaches than anybody out there. In fact, there was one university who wanted to bring me in as a consultant, and their whole purpose was to gather mud on the track coach so they could fire the track coach. I didn't take that paycheck.
Wow.
But yeah, the athletic administrators can be pretty devious at times. But anyhow, that unfortunately that the reason that stereotype exists is because almost all stereotypes have some basis in fact. And so often you got a strength coach who has a football background or whatever and really doesn't understand the speed side of things. And you got a track coach who kind of has a hunch of what needs to be done, but isn't good at verbalizing or doesn't maybe get the science behind it or whatever. And I think I can maybe make those things mesh to some extent. And the other thing that really helped us at LSU this time around was, I'm not doing it quite as much now, but during the nice little run we've had with some really good athletes here, is that I've been extremely involved with the sports medicine stuff. For a while, when I was working with the hospital in Thibodeau, I had a lot of opportunities to do rehabs, and I developed some philosophies on rehab and things like that are much more in line with training than they are with traditional rehab. And some rehab people consider me a pariah. Some of them consider me lucky, and a few of them consider me a genius. So I'm the all ends of the spectrum, But to make a long story short, when it comes to rehab, I just try to take the things that I've learned as a coach of healthy athletes and just try to apply those principles in the rehab setting. And it just seems to go a lot better than a lot of traditional rehab does, to be honest with you. And the sports medicine people that I work with have been pretty open to involving me in the rehab process and making suggestions in the rehab processes and so forth, and maybe even making some advice as far as referrals and who to refer people to. And it's made a really big difference in our program, So make a long story short, that's been helpful.
So on the strength and conditioning side for the LSU track team, how much are you enjoying that aspect? So, because I'm guessing you get to touch, if not all, a majority of the event groups. You get to see, you talked earlier about, sitting up against the wall, watching the high school athletes compete. You kind of get that same viewpoint now for all of the athletes on the LSU's track team.
Yeah, I get to be involved with everybody, and, because I'm involved with the rehab and that type of stuff, and I'm kind of a go-between between the athletes and a kind of an advocate for the athletes with the sports medicine people and whatever at times. I get to be involved with just about everybody at some point in time. So it's a good thing. Coach Shaver's been really great and some of our sports medicine people have been really great because they kind of almost allowed me to take this position and almost tailor it to my strengths, so to speak, where I can kind of interject when I need to interject, and they might say that I interject a little too much or whatever, but so be it. I can be painfully blunt. I don't know if you know this, but I can be painfully blunt. And sometimes I just tell them I'm not gonna pretend to be stupid so you can feel better about yourself. And that's one of the things that I live by. And every once in a while it'll rub somebody the wrong way, but that's how the real world works. And kids are going to go where they can get answers, and ultimately that's the way it is. I spent a lot of time mentoring young coaches, and sometimes now I mentor young therapists and trainers, and I tell them all the time that your title has nothing to do with with anything. Just because you are the trainer at this school or the coach of this at that school, kids are always going to look for answers. And if you're not providing answers to them, they're going to seek elsewhere. Right. And it doesn't matter if you have that title or not. So basically, if they're not coming to you for the answers, then you have to raise your game, because the title doesn't entitle you to anything. Ultimately, that's the way it works. Even when I had really, really good athletes and I was respected as a coach, there are people this, Mike, there are people in your athletes' ears all the time. I can coach you better. I can make you do better, or whatever. Well, if they're doing pretty good, they're with you. But if they're not doing well, they start listening, so there's always people in their ear. And ultimately, that's one of the things I love about it, is it's ultimately the accountability associated with it. If you can produce results and produce answers for athletes, and athletes come to you with problems and you help them to solve them, they're going to keep coming back. And and like I said, if you feel like the athletes are not doing that with you, you need to improve your game. You need to improve your skill level in that regard.
In this position, how is your relationship with the coaches staff there? And you get every once in a while a new coach comes in, and how much of a pain in your butt is Houston Franks?
Let me tell you something. Houston Franks amazes me every day. That guy is one of the most, we are so happy to have him. And awesome. He's just kind of getting the ball rolling in that regard, but he is sharp as a whip. He is a fantastic coach, and he's got the personality to deal with different types of people. And he can take a pissed off kid and defuse it. He can take a kid and bring him back. I mean, he just knows how to do it. And I'm just really looking forward to see what he does with that program in the next few years. Love Mississippi State, got a lot of friends over there, but we just got a different level of resource. And I just excited to see what he's going to be doing there.
The biggest compliment I can give him is, he was my roommate for a year and he survived. So he's pretty good. You said he could deal with a pissed off kid. Well, he could deal with me. So, I feel like I maybe helped him with his skill set there.
Yeah.
So let's turn, as we start to wrap up today here, Boo, let's turn to coaching education and camps and clinics and things like that. I told you earlier, you're one of less than a handful of people that gets mentioned on this podcast. I'm gonna say every other, but it's a higher. It's not everyone specifically, but it's a higher rate than even every other one. And sometimes it's me bringing up stories of from my time of education with you, which, and I've said it 100 times here, changed the course of my coaching career, all for the better. And then it's the guest will have some comment of like, man, I saw Boo at the Louisiana clinic, or I went to level 2, or I went to USTFCA. And it's always, literally always batting 1,000% here, always in a positive light, not even in a mediocre light, Boo. Not even in a like, yeah, I listened to Boo. It was okay. And I've heard that from other coaches, from other clinics and stuff, right? Always with you, Boo, always. It is whatever the closest thing to life-changing can be in the profession of coaching track and field. I don't want to overstate it here, so I'll keep it just under life-changing. What drew you? We talked a little bit about it, but what has drawn you into being this, not just a coach of athletes and coaching amazing 57-foot triple jumpers and 22 and 23-foot female long, just decathletes, pole vaulters, throwers. It's one thing to be a great coach, and there's some amazing coaches out there, and I love them. You have transcended a whole nother step and affected this sport unlike anybody that I can even think of right now in regards to helping other coaches become better coaches. Where did that come from? Where is that selflessness of, I'm going to give away all my secrets? I'm doing air quotes there. I'm going to give it all to you. There's no holding back here. You're going to get it all. Where does that come from, Boo?
Well, I think some of it started with Dan, just the fact that he was willing to do it for me, kind of planted a seed and planted a little bit of obligation, and I think we just have an obligation to leave something better than you got it, you know. But that being said, a lot of it just has to do with what I feel about coaches. I said earlier that I think coaches are so often the most important people in athletes' lives, ultimately sports teaches lessons. I have a huge what's the word I'm looking for here? I feel very strongly that athletics is probably the best personality development program that a person can go through. It kind of teaches you the lessons you're supposed to learn. If you kind of go through sports and stick to the structure and whatever, you're going to come out a better person because of the lessons that you learn there. And ultimately, that's what coaches do. Coaches provide those opportunities. And I just feel that coaching is a hard job. It doesn't pay enough. It's difficult. You're dealing with athletes that don't appreciate you now. They'll appreciate you in 10 years, but they don't necessarily appreciate you now. And you have all those issues. And I just felt that maybe my way of contributing to the world is if I make the world a better job for coaches, and coaching are doing all this stuff, good stuff, then maybe I'm making the world a better place. So it's kind of become a passion in that regard. I just think that coaches do more for young people than just about anybody else. And if I can help coaches do that, that's what I'm going to do, And I'm not really if it comes through technical knowledge or whatever, or confidence building or mentoring or whatever, I'm just going to do that. So I think it just comes from my respect for coaching as a profession and the value of coaching as a profession. I just think that there's, in our society today, there's so many fussing and fighting and all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, I just think that coaches, you hear the argument. I don't think there's ever been a government program that has ever done more positive for society than any single coach has ever done for the athletes in their care. You can take all the government money you want, put all the social work programs you want out there, whatever. None of them will ever surpass the good athletes get from playing organized sports with good coaches. And I just feel that strongly, and that's why I think it's a passion of mine, to be honest with you.
So there's lots of coaches out there that on the track working with an athlete, they're really good. They're good at their craft. And then you might ask them to explain something that they're doing or that they saw or reasoning behind it, and they can't string 3 words together. It's a different skill to be able to teach that. On top of that, and I'm sure it's not just me, because I've heard this story a couple of times from lots of coaches, you have a propensity to always communicate back with people that communicate with you, that are asking for help. Like, I know personally, my example, I emailed you out of the blue. You had no clue who I was. This is before I did level 2 and met you personally. Emailed you out of the blue, was like, hey, I don't even remember what the issue was. It was something. What can you recommend? And really, I'll be real frank here. I sent that email thinking, yeah, I might as well not send it. He ain't reading this. He ain't responding. He's at LSU. I had this like, oh, LSU, which might actually be true, right? But like, he's not going to email. I think I was at junior college. I think I was at Neosho over in Kansas. So I'm like, he's not going to email me back. I don't have any athletes for him to recruit, so there's no reason. There's nothing in it for him to respond. And you responded in a timely manner. Even not even like a week later, like quickly within 24 hours, and not a 1-word, 2-word answer, like a thought out response. And of course, I took that advantage. I was like, well, I got to respond off of that. So I responded, and it became this correspondence. And I've heard that story again. This is another one of those. I've heard 1,000 of those stories. I emailed Boo out of the blue. That's hard to say 3 times fast. I emailed Boo out of the blue, and he responded. Like, people are like, oh my God, yeah, I couldn't believe he actually responded. I bring him down a little bit. I'm like, I hope you don't think you're special, meaning he does that with everybody. He's the special one here. How do you, I mean, you do so much. You're coaching, you have your own private side, you're rewriting curriculum and teaching curriculum, and yet you seem to be able to respond to everybody.
Well, you got to do what you got to do. I mean, it's important. And you got to do what you got to do. That's what's important. There's something I'm doing that's not as important as that. I'm sure I'll just put that on the shelf. But ultimately, I've been in the same situation, where I'm grasping for answers or whatever, and I'm desperate, and this kid wants to succeed, and they're highly motivated, and I'm not helping them. I mean, I've been in that situation. I know what it's like, and I'm not, I can't get everybody within 24 hours, but, if you send me a question, I'm going to answer it if I can, because simply there aren't places for coaches to go, And again, I go back to what I said, coaching is hard. But I get a lot of credit for that. But I'm going to say one thing. There's a lot of coaches who give like that. There are a lot. Dan was that way, and what's funny is that in my career, when I've reached out, the very best coaches are always open. Like when I contacted a really good coach, maybe it's a little sooner, maybe it's a little later, whatever, but they always are given. They always given. Now, the second tier of coaches, the ones who aren't the very best, but they're a little bit under, those are the ones who, well, I can't tell you that. That's my secret, So I just think that when you become a good coach, there's a certain level of security that you have. And you understand, as long as you have some athletes, you're going to be perfectly fine. And it doesn't hurt anything to give away secrets or advice or whatever, because ultimately, you're safe and comfortable in your own skin, so to speak. And I think that's part of it is, ultimately aspiring to be comfortable in your own skin. Ultimately, and I tell the kids all the time, I told the other day, we were trying to talk, I was talking to this young lady, long jumper, not on our team, a different one. And we're trying to come up with a strategy, and I want her to have some input. And I told her, I said, look, I don't have a skin in the game. I says, if you do poorly, nobody's going to say I'm a bad coach. And if you do great, I don't get to keep the trophy. You keep it. So, so that's the way we need to look at it. Ultimately, I think we always need to keep in mind that ultimately the competitions are for the athletes. You kind of want to think that you're the quarterback who's controlling everything, or you're not even the quarterback, maybe the puppeteer, who's pulling the strings and control, but you're not. Ultimately, you're not. What you're doing is you're trying to prepare these athletes to handle their own competitions, is what you're trying to do here. And if you kind of look at it that way, then it becomes a lot easier, I think, to be unselfish in that regard.
I'm going to lie and say I've got 2 more questions, Boo. I'm sure that's going to get 200 more. But so we've talked about Dan Paff a lot today and what he meant to you. And thank God for his mentorship and selflessness with you, because that helps grow that with you. And I love Dan as well. He's amazing. I have several talks with him, love him to death. In fact, you two are, when I describe coaches, I'll say a lot of times, like, there's a lot of great coaches. And then there's just a handful that are just one step above, and you and Dan are always in that group that I mentioned.
Well, thank you.
Something that is different though, Dan, super smart. I mean, if you've ever had a conversation with Dan Paff, that dude is just smart. I am an untrained coach who got a public relations degree from Troy University. When Dan talks to me, I won't even talk about camps and clinics. I'll just talk about when we have conversations, when we used to have coaching conversations. I don't even try anymore. Come on, I can't coach myself out of a paper bag now. But when I used to, like, soak up all this knowledge, Dan would say things, and I could tell, like, there were things like, oh, okay, I need to pick up this and this and this, but it was at such a level I just couldn't grasp. Now, and obviously there's brilliant coaches out there. Part of it was me and my education level. So there's plenty of people that Dan has affected positively here. You are able to teach high level stuff, but at I'm gonna call it a kindergarten level, because that's basically where I was at. You're able to help people who don't have science backgrounds, who maybe have never even coached the event. They just know, hey, I came to level 2 because next year I got to coach jumps, and I'm a thrower by trade. I know nothing about jumps. You're able to simplify very difficult concepts. Was that from your teaching background? You mentioned teaching math. Was it from that background, or how did that skill develop?
I think that part of it does come from my teaching background. I think it's also a kind of a product of my personality. My personality is I have organized thought processes. So I'm always thinking in terms of cleaning up the thought process. I'm always thinking in terms of trees. Yes, no, yes is this, no is this. And then yes might brings you to another, so I'm always thinking that's how my brain works, meaning that there, I think in a very organized fashion. And I think the reason I can bring it across as organized is because it's genuinely filed in my head in an organized fashion in the same way. So it's not abstract to me. It's not like a black box thing where here's a cause, here's an effect, and there's no tracing in between. To me, the routes of cause, effect, and everything are very clear. And I just think that it has something to do that that's just how I think, so to speak. So everything to me is kind of cause effect in that regard. I'm always looking for those relationships. Some people might say, well, that makes me not a creative person. And that's probably a valid criticism, to be honest with you. I'm the kind of person that, like, I could never write a song. I could never write a poem. I could never do anything like that. How the hell do you just come up with a tune and work? How do you do that? I can't do that. But if you give me an idea, I can elaborate on it and make it a whole book. So I'm not the creative person, but I'm the person who can do logical deductions and engineering problem solve and organize things and put things in neat folders and whatever. And that's kind of how my mind works.
I was about to say, you're an engineer. That you just described engineering right there. So you say you're not the creative person, but that's exactly where my second question was coming here. You are infamous. I'll go with infamous on your stick figure drawing. Like, it is, if stick figures is an art form, then this is what you do. I have seen you draw long jump, triple jump, high jump in stick figures that, again, I'm just like, oh, I get it now. Like, you almost had me believing after level 2 jumps that I could coach the pole vault. Almost. Luckily for all our athletes, I did not coach pole vault, but you almost have. I was like, oh man, look at that stick figure. I could get that stick figure to do that. Yeah.
And it's a shame. It's a shame, Mike. The younger generation of coaches, they have no idea because everybody wants PowerPoint.
Oh, yeah.
But I can still do it. Back when I was coaching and recruiting, we used to take the recruits to one of these restaurants where they put paper on the table, and they used to bring out the crayons, and whatever the kids' event was, I would stick figure their event from beginning to end all the way across the table.
Oh,
I don't know that it ever made a difference, but anyway, it was a conversation starter, if nothing else.
How many, I wonder, and there's a number, I know athletes still have that, like, is in their scrapbook or in their thing. That's cool, man.
That's a good question.
Because I guarantee you, no other coach did that. Let me just say. Where did that draw? Because that is you talk about right brain, left brain type stuff, right? That is a creative thing. That's a visualization. When did you start that? And did you have to learn it, or was it like automatically you were able to translate what you see into really well figured stick figures?
Well, it's knowing what you see. To me, it's not creative. It's just factual. All you're doing is repeating something that you've seen. But the other thing is that there are rules, like of how the human body operates biomechanically. Like when you're in kind of unilateral movement, single leg type of patterns, one joint is going to be at maximal flexion when the other joint is at maximal extension, and vice versa. If you're working bilateral, then typically similar joints are going to have similar extension patterns. So basically there are rules as to how the body operates. And when I draw the stick figures, what I'm doing is I'm kind of operating by those rules. I know the points at which the elbow angle and the knee angle are going to match. I know the times when the ankle angle and, so I understand commensurate positions and those relationships biomechanically. And that's the trick, so to speak, of it, is to kind of take biomechanics to a whole new level. But no, that's not creative at all. It's totally factual, man.
If you didn't have the emotions and feelings that you have, you would be the Dr. Spock of coaching track and field. You're so logical. Like, no, this moves here. That means this has got to move here. If you want to do this, you got to do that.
You ask some of the athletes I coach how logical I am, because I got a little bit of reputation as somebody who get a little heated every once in a while too. I'm that person that lets everything slide about 95%, but when I go off, I really go off.
It's funny you said that, because there's this memory burned in my head from our level 2. And by the way, I got to give a shout out to a mutual friend of ours, Mike Korn. When I was signing up for my first level 2, I was a sprints and hurdles coach. So I was going to go do sprints and hurdles. And it was the Boise State level 2. And he calls me up. He goes, "Hey, Mike, I'm sorry, it's full. Do you want to do jumps?" And I was like, "Jumps? Man, I coach jumps." I was at Ball State. I coach jumps here because Sue Parks makes me, not because I want to. I want to be Dan Pat. I want to be a great sprints and hurdles coach, And he goes, "Hey, trust me, man, you'll learn a lot from the jumps. Just do it. Okay. Just consider it and do it." And I remember I was like, "Mike, all right, fine, I'll do it." And thank the Lord I did it. Love my sprint teachers. The very next year, I told you, Dennis Shaver, Gary Winkler, maybe Rocklight. I think I can't remember who the other sprint coach was, unfortunately. But I did learn so much from level 2, from the jumps, more about the training theory of not necessarily, the technique, but how do you sequence your training. That's what kind of like really blew my mind and changed how I coach. But I remember, and if you know anything about memory, it's not a VCR that you just replay. So I'm sure I have some of these facts incorrect here, but here's how I remember it. We were talking about triple jump, and you were talking about, difference between training a triple jumper more like a short sprinter versus 400 meters. And you're like, if you want to have the best triple jumper, you can't train them like a 400 meter. It's totally different energy systems, et cetera, et cetera. And this coach, and I don't want to pigeonhole and say he was a high school coach. I have no idea actually, but this coach gets up and says, "Well, Boo, I like all my triple jumpers to run the 400 because it makes them tough." And and through a little bit of back and forth, and you were really good. Like, this is part of your 95% where you let a lot of things go. But ultimately you said, again, you maybe didn't even say this, is just how my memory is, and just all these statements and these terms that you have. I said one earlier: "You to coach, be to coach." That's straight from you all the way. But you looked at the guy and you said, "Look, when they make an event called tough, I'll train a kid to be tough. But right now it's triple jump in the 400, and those should not mix." But I was just so impressed how, I knew who you were in stature, and LSU coach, automatically you get, track cred for that, right? And I remember the audacity of this guy. Like, you're arguing with Boo Schexnayder. What are you doing? And you were just so calm, cool, and collect, didn't let it overtake the class, and went right back into your stick figures. It was quite amazing of how you handled people in that sense.
And sometimes there are instructors in coaching ed, and I got to encourage them, because sometimes they try to validate things. When I taught a coaching ed class, and somebody who just would voice something that's like wrong or totally wrong, I wanted everybody in the class to know it was wrong. Because, you handle this one person with kid gloves or whatever, but I don't want the rest of the class leaving with a clouded picture of what's actually correct and so forth. So I just think those are little stands that you kind of have to take, to be honest with you. I mean, it's right or it's wrong. There's very little gray area. So that being said, I just sometimes you don't have the courage to confront, or the courage to correct, or the courage to just tell somebody they're wrong, and that's not right. That's why even with dealing with the athletes to this day, I'm blunt. I'm positive to a certain extent, but I'm also kind of blunt. Like, this is where you are, and this is what you can expect, or whatever. And I don't like to deal in fantasy. It's not a good betting model.
I tell you, the engineering mind is coming out every sentence. Now, every sentence I hear, I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's right or wrong. Yep, very little gray." That's true. Boo, man, I can't thank you enough. Literally, I could sit here for another 2 hours and trade stories back and forth with you, because you are a man of stories.
Couldn't we? Because we've done some stuff. But I want to thank you, because this has been so fun. Because normally I'm talking technical stuff and whatever, and to kind of take you through the journey and kind of get to open up a little bit about my ups and my downs has been a lot of fun and very therapeutic for me. So, Mike, this has maybe been the most fun thing I've ever done, podcast wise. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for that. That's, I'm honored. And these podcasts, like these interviews here, are really, really tough for me. Mouse and Karen Dennis was another one. It's people that I coached for 10 years. you guys and gals were the ones I looked up to. Like I said, I'd email you and help me out here. I'd email Karen, I'd email Mouse, and be like, help me out here, and then get my butt kicked when I went to their conference and stuff. So it's a little nerve wracking because it's, I put you on a pedestal, rightfully so. And I'm just so happy that you are human and that the things that you do matter. I talk a lot about, I said it earlier, about coaches, and right where your 2 feet are right now, you're making an amazing positive impact. Whether you coach 10 kids or 100 kids, you coach middle school, you coach professionals, you have a real honor and ability to positively affect those kids' lives. And this is the great part about it. This is where math comes in. You'll be able to explain this way better than I can, Boo. Math, right? Multiple. So if you coach 10 kids, those 10 kids go on to become moms and dads and doctors and lawyers and coaches, and they affect young people in a positive manner. And they harken back to how you treated them as a coach, and they teach their children how to be that way, their coworkers to be that way, their athletes to be that way. You have a whole different multiple set here, Boo. So not only do you have that athletes, you've coached for a long time, and you've got many, many athletes that are coaches now, moms, doctors, dads, great people in society. Your web over coaches, every coach that you've taught in a positive manner has gone on to affect positively thousands of athletes. Your tree, so to speak, it's not even a tree, it's a friggin' forest here, my man. You have affected so many young people's lives directly as a coach and indirectly as the coach of a coach. And you've changed people's careers. I distinctly, I've told the story 100 times. I'm not going to tell the full story now. My career was 10 years. There is a distinct 5-year mark. And that 5 years, right after 5 years was when I had you. My next 5 years, I look like a genius. Maybe not so much there. That was a little far, but it's way different because of the impact you had on my life. And I know that is shared by literally thousands of people in the coaching profession, my man. And I'm just so thankful. Thankful that Dan Paff saw something in you and took the time to teach you. I'm so thankful that you didn't go on to become the defensive coordinator of the the Saints here in Louisiana. I'm so thankful the path that you've taken to get to where you are today, because it has been so positive in so many people's lives, man. And I'm just so thankful from all of the coaching body. Thank you from all of us.
Thank you, Mike. I think I'm going to hire you to do my tombstone. Okay.
Hey, that is going to be one. Excuse my French, one big ass tombstone, my man. Got a lot of accolades, but man, I am so thankful. I'm so thankful you would join us here tonight, man.
Been a pleasure.
You're extremely busy. It was a wing and a prayer to reach out to you, because I'm like, man, he's going to be so busy. And I also knew, because I know you well enough, I was like, he is going to make the time. So I had to be very careful of your time, man. It's precious. And I'm just so thankful you'd be here with us today and be so open and authentic and humble with us today.
This has been therapeutic. Appreciate you giving me the opportunity. Thanks.
It's all the honor is mine, man. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this story. This is, he's a legend. And sometimes we don't get to hear and honor our legends while they're here. And so it was important for me personally to be able to have a mentor of mine, somebody who, again, changed my life as it relates to coaching. And I tell you what, Boo, I take the selflessness and attitude of, helping people. I take that into my daily life now as a father and as a husband and as a professional here at Gill Athletics, man. You set a great example for all of us. So thank you for being here and listening. If you found value in today's podcast, I'm going to go on a limb and say someone else in your network would receive value as well. So share it and just spread this story, and then go be like Boo, man. Go out and help someone else, your athletes, other coaches. Give what you have away, because it's going to come back to you 1 million times. So thanks for being here today. Join us next week and we'll do it all over again.